Brought to you by SunWest Genetics.
What's up, potheads and political junkies? You're watching Cannabis Culture News Live. Jeremiah and Mr. Cookie here.
Howdy, y'all. Here just blowing O's.
Just blowing O's. We also have... chuckling and owing in the background is Mr. David Malmo Levine, just back from a ZZ Top concert where he's touring, replacing
Beard
one of the
substitution.
band members.
I'm just blowing you.
And also Mr. Opus.
Another O.
Another O. You got
Oing.
the O boys are in the house.
Oh.
There they are.
Oh.
Dun dun dun. Oh.
Okay.
And I got a ghost
and
on
I'm
my
wearing-
shirt.
Oh.
That's boo, I guess.
Oh. That's ooh.
If I read
So-
it, it'd be oh.
It's all vowels on the show today.
That's what it's about.
Boot. So
Health Canada's cartel.
we are going to talk to David Malmo Levine about Health Canada's cartel, the cannabis cartel that's being built across Canada. There's only a few players in the game right now.
They just made it
That's why it's
ridiculously expensive to be a micro grow. You have to have a lot of
Thank
macro
you.
money to be a micro grow.
That's
how
right.
Macro.
cartel works.
Yeah, so that happened last week. We're also going to talk about on the show today, and we actually named the show after this. We named the show City of Vancouver v. Stoners.
Nice.
Melissa DeGenova has been busy over
Oh,
at
the
the
parade.
old City Hall.
Pooper.
She
Yeah.
almost came to tears over how dangerous we were to the kids. Meanwhile,
I heard this.
25 years of rallies, no deaths. Cannabis prohibition, few deaths every year. Sometimes teenagers getting shot on
Microphone.
botched drug rates. Our safety record is better than the prohibition she's ramming down our throats. She says, "Oh, we're bullies. We're coming in there and are forcing ourselves onto the park to celebrate our plant and protest for equal rights." And meanwhile, she ignores the bullies, which are the police shutting down dispensaries, going into people's homes, shooting their dogs. Those are the real bullies. They actually have victims.
Exactly.
We trample grass. They trample rights.
Like,
and
I'm
people.
sorry about. Just got to interrupt about this whole coming in and using something that's not ours. Doesn't the park belong to the citizens?
Unless you're pothead.
That right?
The other tax-paying citizens. That's, I think she said.
Yeah.
It's
and
just
see,
discrim, man. It's just discriminating.
they can't stop our protest, and they can't sue us for our protest. They can try all they want to. I would love them to. If they actually, what happened was the City Council of Vancouver voted
Lay it
on a
out for
motion.
us.
Yes, that's Councillor DeGenova put forward that said the City of Vancouver should suggest to the staff that they look into suing us for the cost of 420 that we don't pay for,
And everyone
i.e.
involved.
the police costs.
The police-
Staging,
And everybody
equipment,
involved.
The turf guys.
What's stopping the
All
government?
everyone.
What's stopping the government from just sending as many police as it would take to bankrupt any protests they didn't like? Oh, the communists are marching. Let's send 1,000 police there, or so forth and so on. That's what
It's
they're doing to us.
bullshit. They're not going to be able to do it. They're just telling their staff. They're suggesting that they look into seeing if it's possible to do. That's what the motion meant. And the motion got split into two as well, and only half of the motion passed. The other part, the part to charge other companies or look at charging everybody else, that was a nay.
They're
The other
like,
was a yay. But
"Nay."
yeah,
The
Nay.
only qualifier in the
Twitch.
Constitution of Canada that affects whether you have the right to peaceful assembly and expression is peaceful. It's not permitted assembly. It's not quiet assembly. It's just peaceful assembly.
Yes.
Ours is peaceful every time. The only violence is introduced by alcoholics coming in and looking for a fight.
Yep.
We are peaceful. Therefore, we should have the right to assembly. Period. End of
should.
story.
We should.
Full stop.
We're going to
No
talk more
questions
about some of that
asked.
stuff with Mr. Dana Larson when he joins us on the program in a few, after we talk to David and Opus. But David, you have some other shenanigans that you've been up to. That
Health
I
Canada's
wanted to talk to-
cartel. I talked to the guy whose job it was to sell it to everybody else.
Yes,
he
I know
brought
that
up
guy.
how harmful cannabis was. I asked him to be specific. That turned into a full-on interruption of his spiel, in which case he refused to go on camera and give us an interview for Pod TV, but Anil just started taping him anyway, and we got the full thing. And it ends up with him having nothing to say about the catch-22 that you have to have a ton of money to get in this game at all. You can't go to a bank loan until you have approval, and you can't get approval till you got a bank loan. It's the catch-22 for the poor people.
Yep.
I told him about it. I pointed it out to him. He's like, he just kind of shut up. And then his eyes glazed over. He had nothing to say, and all his reconciliations, and
political.
all his inner justifications just melted. And I fucked the robot over for a second. It was like it's like at a Star Trek, right?
Yeah.
When Kirk does not compute, have nothing to say. No soundbite available. And then I caught him there, and then and then someone else came up to him and said, "Oh, I need to borrow him for a minute." And I was like, "Yeah, 'cause I'm not getting anything else out of him." And it ended perfectly. And I just think, just for a second there, he felt shitty about who he was as a person and what he was doing to the farmers and gardeners, not just in Canada, but over the whole world, that are going to point to this model and use it for their enslavement model.
Well, and they've made it harder for microprocessors to get involved in the whole thing by decreeing just a few weeks ago that you now, instead of just having to have your property purchased, you also have to have a building on that property built.
You
Ready for
have
them.
everything
Ready.
up and running. You can't do that without a bank loan if you're poor, but you can if you're a deep pockets, rich millionaire greaseball opportunist who just sees cannabis as a way to have a captive market instead of a community heritage, the window box economy. The riches of the earth are for all. Let little people have little grows and big people have big grows. Everyone wins.
I think it looks pretty bad, but I think there's still going to be ways for micro cultivators to get involved, and I think that this isn't the end of the road, because we've been talking to some people about what they think the future is going to look like, and some of the availabilities that are being built right now. And there are things. There's a company that's coming out, or a group that's doing something called Cannabis Haven. And what they're doing is they have setups where they have a big, huge warehouse purchased, essentially, and then they divvy it up into all these spaces. And it's like a U-grow, essentially. So rather than...
But for micros.
Yeah, for micros. So rather than having where you have to get your own property, you have to get your own building, you have to go through this whole process, they've already got all that done for you. You just walk right in, and all you have to do is have your security clearance, and you're ready to go. And so that'll end up being a lot less. But right now, I mean, Health Canada is doing everything they can to make it difficult for microprocessors.
They want us to choose between a good cartel and a bad cartel, an inclusive cartel or an exclusive cartel. And really, our job as activists to settle for no cartel at all. Right. I call it the window box economy. If you have access to sunlight, even indirect sunlight works, and a window, you should be able to put plants in that window and grow, if you want, a Christmas tree out on the side of your... I've seen them grow. You should have the right to do that. It's like coffee beans. It's non-threatening. Yeah. The only way they can push this thing off is if they push that Reefer Madness 2.0, makes the kids stupid and crazy, makes you crash your car. All that BS, it's up to us to call them on their BS every time. I'm trying to set a good example for the rest of the pot activists that remain representing the small business people and the vulnerable people who need pot, who use pot, pregnant women, the vulnerable youth, the chronic users, and the mentally ill, the four vulnerable groups that the Supreme Court identified justified prohibition. We need to defend their right to use pot, use it safely, use it properly, and treat it as a soft drug that it is.
Well, and after we talk about a little more about this Health Canada thing and play the video, we should talk about some of the other Reefer Madness children's edition going on at the moment in the Canadian news, including, I don't think maybe we talked about it at the beach last week, but just for a moment or two, about the Lego, the death Lego, death gummies. So the CBC reported that this company, actually, I guess it was a press release from
Not under your foot type.
the Quebec police, was it?
Probably.
I think
I
it
was
was.
thinking, I know if you step on death Lego, that'll hurt.
No, it
your
was the
foot.
RCMP. My fault.
That's right, RCMP.
So the RCMP put out a press release saying we raided this dispensary and we found these gummies. They're Lego-shaped gummies, and in one of these gummies, there's enough to kill a child.
Lethal dose.
Lethal dose.
Do you know the lethal dose of cannabis? The actual lethal dose of cannabis? It's
You'd have to
10
have a-
pounds in 10 minutes smoked, or a pound and a half of plus 10% THC eaten, and you puke and pass out before you reach the lethal dose, which is why even hashish smugglers, which had baggies burst in their bellies, had never achieved a legal dose. It's not on record.
You'd have to eat a gummy the size of my car, essentially.
You'd have to concentrate.
In 3 minutes, yeah.
No, but because the
I'd be
human
down for
body...
trying.
Digest it.
The human body
do
would
it.
reject it, puke it up, or the human body would shut down before a lethal dose was achieved, which is why there are no lethal doses on rec.
But so when the media called the RCMP out for this whole thing, they retracted it, sort of. They came out and they said, well, it wasn't, we spoke out of turn. It wasn't really our jurisdiction to say that it's a lethal dose. But we're not saying it's not true.
That's it.
That's literally what they said.
They took the low road.
Gave a little wink.
Yeah, they said, it's not our position
But they,
to comment.
when Manisha from Vice published the article saying about that they retracted it, they actually called her back and said, no, we weren't retracting it. We were just saying we spoke out of turn. It could actually be true. We don't know that it's not true.
Greasy.
Carly wants to do
2 seconds
something.
on the mic. She's not even coming on camera.
She-
Just
I'm not going on
voice.
camera.
The voice
I
of
just
Carly.
no.
Point a camera at her.
I just was gonna say it's not at all surprising that RCMP is doing things to continue further stigmatizing cannabis when cannabis has been used as a tool to go after, the most vulnerable people, as David was saying, including people of color, including Indigenous people in Canada. And the RCMP was literally created to get rid of Indigenous people in Canada and to enforce colonization. So it's really not surprising that they're continuing to stigmatize a substance that's used to frequently arrest Indigenous
That's right.
people because that's modern day colonization.
That's right.
I agree completely. Plus their budget,
Long
they just
over
got
the
another $300 million to enforce prohibition. So they have that going for them too.
Yeah, there's a
last
lot.
summer, I actually rode on the Red Coat Highway, which is named for the way that the RCMP came west to bring law and order, and they're exactly what Carly was talking about,
Would
and
have
to
been
come
smoking on
and
that whole
go
highway.
after the whole Western culture, which included Indigenous cultures, and there was lawlessness in the land, and But so I rode that and stopped at some of the spots and have read on some of the plaques, and if you read between the lines, it's a lot about what you're talking about. It's just horrible what happened.
In the car.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the legalization in the United States in Colorado and actually in 4 U.S. states show a racist enforcement of the new laws. That it's gone up, like it went down 10% for white youth and up 50% for black non-white youth in Colorado.
Yep.
So the war on drugs has always been a racist war. It was created by racists for both monopolistic and racist white supremacist reasons, quite frankly. And we got to own up to it and call them out on it and say no more of it, because we want full legalization where the poor can enjoy all the fruits and the young can enjoy all the fruits of legalization too. And then we can stop having any kind of racist arrests. There was no coffee bean arrests last year or the year before. And there should be no pot arrests either.
It's funny how in the States you're seeing a lot of people talking about these issues, and there's even a lot of politicians who are getting behind these issues, even calling for reparations for the cannabis community, or saying that people in the cannabis community should have first crack at jobs or investing in things. And but you don't see, it's weird because in the States, even with when they were, each state was doing their own legalization efforts, there's always like a huge list of politicians who are on board with the groups that are doing it. And they're they have signed petitions from these politicians. Where are these politicians in Canada? Where are the politicians in Canada that support our community and are actually speaking for us and demanding reparations for our community?
Nobody's vocal. I tried to get the Green Party to be more vocal. They haven't responded, even though I geeked the heck out of it.
Maybe Paul Manley. So did you see in Nanaimo, Paul Manley was voted in this by-election they had?
I saw that. That's a big green win. It could be a big green wave this year.
And do you know who Paul Manley is?
No, who's Paul Manley?
Paul Manley is, I know him personally from Malaspina University when I was there, now Vancouver Island University. He's a filmmaker who was essentially what I thought was an anarchist filmmaker, who was very progressive and very paradigm
I
busting.
think I might have met him. That Paul Manley.
That's the
like
Paul
one
Manley.
of us.
One of us.
One of us got elected in Nanaimo.
One of us.
Who's also green.
And he is, and I'm telling you, he's one of us. Or he is committed to our cause.
Look at the Green Party platform. It's the only one that specifically says
Happy 420.
small growers should be protected in the commercial economy.
And here's how you know Paul Manley's one of the good ones, because one of his big claims to fame is, remember in Montebello when there were police officers provocateuring, Quebec police officers had dressed up in black outfits with black masks and were throwing rocks at the police.
False flag operation.
And when they started being confronted by the other activists, they were pulled behind the police line and taken away.
The markings on the bottoms of their boots gave them away.
And well, guess who figured that out?
Paul Manley.
Paul Manley, who recorded it all on video, identified in his documentary film, he said, look at the boots, and he like scanned them, put them over top of police boots and proved it. And he's the guy who proved it.
He's our fuck the police candidate.
He is. And then the police actually came out and admitted that they had provocateurs in the audience throwing rocks.
I saw that.
Yeah. And so Paul...
Whatever happened with that? So that's allowed?
That's allowed.
They're like, yeah, we did. Okay, forget about that.
No,
Next.
We'll just
They
lay
admitted-
off for a few years and then call it something else.
Lay off
and
with
do it
pay.
again.
That's not the only time they've done that either. They also blew up a shed here, I think in BC, and blamed it on some native group or whatever. And then, they
The pipeline.
Yeah.
During the Gustafson Lake attack, they were caught on film, a training video that was released afterwards that's saying, oh yeah, smear campaigns are our speciality.
Yikes.
And let me add one more thing.
Oil
Jet
smear.
fuel doesn't melt skyscrapers, especially ones that weren't even hit by airplanes. So if you want to say false flags, I say most wars, except for maybe the Spanish Civil War or one or two others, most wars start with false flag operations. You go World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, all of them.
What, World War II, the Reichstag fire?
Reichstag fire was one. Operation Gladwitz or Canned Goods, where Poland was supposedly to have attacked Germany, was
Right.
another.
They dressed guys up in Polish
And
uniforms.
Pearl Harbor, they moved all their aircraft carriers to safety before Pearl Harbor got hit. Aircraft carriers won the war in World War II. It was not a matter of destroyers, and they had cracked the Japanese code purple years or months before. Anyway, with enough time to know that the Japanese were coming, and they needed an entrance into the war. And
It's
they,
true.
They got one.
But would you argue that... See,
Roosevelt needed enough public support to push it through. And that's what Pearl Harbor provided.
but there was
It was an understood. They didn't tell the Japanese to attack.
do you think
they
that
just
was the
steered
wrong...
the Japanese
Do you think it
into
was the
attacking.
wrong decision to get into the war for the U.S., though? I know we're
Well,
on
the
a
wrong
tangent,
decision
but-
happened back in the 20s when IG Farben and Standard Oil plotted World War II as a moneymaker. Like, I'm sorry, but that's where you got to stop fascism from starting world wars. It's back when they have enough money and enough power to pull it off. If you get to the 30s where the Nazis are in power, then it becomes too late and you just got to deal with the outcome. But if you can see the patterns and who makes money off wars and who has the power to start them, it's guys like Standard Oil, IG Farben, the biggest companies in the world.
Well, you figure the U.S. government knew exactly what they were up to because they were attempting to do it in the U.S. before that even.
And the Bushes.
Smedley Butler and all that.
Yeah. Well, and war is a racket.
War is a
Smedley,
racket.
Read your Smedley Butler. It's
Yeah.
one of the greatest treatises on war and business.
War is a racket.
Or the movie Air America, where
Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson and Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr.'s character says, "War? Business. I thought this is a war." And then the guy responds, "What makes you think they're not the same thing?"
That's a good impression you just did of Robert Downey Jr. as well.
Yeah. Well,
RDB.
it was passable. My Marge Simpson's a lot better. But can we get to the video where I dressed down Health Canada's grease
Sure.
weasel?
Sure, yes.
Pause for this
Had our
brief
fun
video
with
of
our
a dress
tangents.
down.
So,
Oh.
We've got obviously a level of interest a little higher than the room that we planned for, but hopefully this can work in terms of the sound quality. I think you can all see the screen back there, and we may kind of alternate sitting and standing over the course of the afternoon.
And I know when I hear a lot when I'm out talking with people, I hear comments that cannabis is a low-risk product. I've been a regulator for a long time, and I've seen lots of circumstances of low-risk products that hurt people. And they don't usually hurt people sometimes because of the product themselves, but when you take that product and you manufacture it, you put it through some form of processing, you put it into packaging, all of those things provide an opportunity for something to become contaminated, for something to create a harm into the system. And so those are the rules are the things that kind of give us comfort.
When it comes to activities with cannabis, the first question you need to ask is, am I permitted to do this under the Cannabis Act or the cannabis regs? Whereas in a lot of other businesses, you would just go off and do something, and only by exception would there be some kind of a prohibition or a rule that might say that you can't. So activities around cannabis are very strictly regulated, and you need to think about that first around what it is you're proposing to do with the plant, with the cannabis products. So when you do get a license, it comes with a certain set of expectations from consumers, from the provincial and territorial wholesaler buyers, that certain standards have been met. So the stuff that we have around good production practices being the most notable piece of that. So the quality of the product, the accuracy of your label, and when you don't meet those expectations, it reflects not just on the business, but it could result in harm if someone's is consuming a product where the label doesn't tell them what they should expect in terms of potency, and that's not where any of us want to be.
What kind of harm?
When people consume a product that is stronger than they don't want to, then that's...
It's temporary.
Sure.
Okay.
That seems also true of coffee
Arbitrary.
beans. But we don't need to arrest anyone over coffee beans.
Well, we're not talking about arresting someone, we're talking about putting out a
Yeah,
product.
we are talking about,
Yeah.
all these regulations involve, if you don't comply with them, you might get arrested. Do you know that? Are you aware of that?
So, what we're talking about is, for those who are seeking to come into the regulated market, that meeting the expectations, meeting the rules, it takes some work on your behalf, and those rules are there to try and make sure the public health and safety objectives that we talked about on the previous slide are met. Within a regulated space, when something goes wrong, it's not a criminal offense, generally speaking. It's not regulatory non-compliance, and it means that we'll come in and we'll see you, and we might have to do a recall, and we might have to review your standard operating procedures. But for those who are operating in the regulated space, there's systems in place to try and find issues like a labeling concern and address those and make sure they don't happen again. So it's a way of working through problems in the regulated sector without necessarily getting into any aspect of criminal law.
Are you aware that the harms have been overblown to justify a cartel? Do you have that much self-awareness?
So I think what we've tried to do today is set up a session for those who are interested in coming into the regulated space to find out about what that application process is like, what it takes to make it through it, and what it's like to operate within the regulated space. So
Do you
that's
think
why
the
we're here.
regulations are justified yourself? Do you think we need
So,
to
sir,
justify
I'm not here today to debate whether the Cannabis Act is or is not a good piece of legislation. We're here to try and provide information for those who want to apply under the Act and the regs to participate in the sector as it has been put in place.
If you cannot defend it, do you expect anyone to comply with it?
This is wasting our time.
Yeah, why don't you get lost, buddy?
Sorry, excuse me. Question and answer. There
are people in jail. I don't want to separate this, like I want to paraphrase your question, but I think his concern is if you act outside the regulation, you face criminal prosecution.
It's wasting our time here. It's wasting our
They're
time
going to
here.
exclude you anyway unless you've got deep enough pockets.
If you're outside the regulated industry, you face criminal prosecution, right? So the idea is to get everybody compliant so they don't have to deal with that. So wouldn't the easiest form of regulation be to get everybody in and then just to fix the paperwork as you go?
Respect where the question is coming from, but that's not what we came here to do, and I think most folks here in the room aren't here to debate the merits of the Cannabis Act and the overall regulatory approach. If you would like to, I'd be happy to have a chat with you in the hall, and Joanne can continue with the presentation for the rest of the
Will
audience.
you do that on camera?
No, I'm not here to do that.
Well, then I'm asking you all my questions while the camera's rolling so we get your answers.
Okay, sir, there's 75, 80 people here to hear about the licensing process, and we'd like to move on with the content.
This is the only accountability I get, and I've been working at this for 25 years, and there are hundreds of thousands of people all over the world.
You're wasting our time. You're wasting. Please go.
You think you're going to get in?
Please go.
Do you have the millions necessary to get in?
You don't have a clue what you're talking about. Not a clue.
asking us
He's
about
wasting our
if
time.
you lie about the harm.
Can you not have some security get him out of here? This is wasting our time.
Thanks, folks. Thanks for your patience. We know that people come to this with different views and different experiences and different lived experiences. My goal here today is not to minimize those in any way, but the reason that we do a Q&A session is that so everybody can have the opportunity to ask their questions, raise their concerns. So that's my goal today. I do respect that people have other opinions, and as I go out and talk to stakeholders, I hear those as well. The last thing that we'll kind of touch on within our list is just to say that this is not a space where people can cut corners. So when you fail at the moment, the system fails. And whether that's fair or it's not fair is open for debate. But the reality is that this was a major policy shift for the government. When they moved to legalize cannabis in October of 2018, that was a major policy shift, and we are not a year into it. And there will be learnings over the coming months and the coming years. There will eventually be a review of the program, and those experiences will feed into that. And whether we need to change course along the way and make some fine-tune some things and make some adjustments, those are things we will consider. But at the moment, we find we're still in a place where people have very strong views, and you're hearing that a little bit today. People have strong views. Some people feel very strongly in one direction, but I still go out and talk to people that feel very strongly about that cannabis should be legalized. And that's not the debate that I have, but the reality of it is that the consequence of that is that when something happens in the system, it to some extent reflects on everybody as an applicant and a license holder. And so that's why I say to some extent everybody's kind of looking at us. So with that, we'll kind of end the humor for the presentation, our bad form of humor, and we'll just move along with the deck. Sorry, can everybody hear okay? I know there's a conversation still happening at the back. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So I think we've kind of covered on this. There are a few slides that I'll just kind of touch on lightly. No surprise, the Cannabis Act and the
They're shy with that accountability thing. Look, psychosis rates haven't increased over the last 25, 30 years. IQs haven't dipped. It doesn't make kids stupid or crazy. If you look at impairment levels, it's about 100 times less than the legal levels for alcohol impairment. It's a soft drug. It's like the coffee that you're serving in that room. Nobody got busted for coffee beans this year or last year or the year before. Organic fair trade coffee bean regulations could replace these regulations, and then none of these people would get hurt by their livelihoods being destroyed so that Trudeau's cartel can bask in its opulence and their captive market that they lobbied for. It is genocide of the medically autonomous and the herbally autonomous to deny them an in to legalization. And it's everybody's duty to resist genocide in every non-violent way they can, including breaking up your meetings and calling me on your lies about cannabis being harmful. There's no harm. People don't die of cannabis. More people have died of an overdose of caffeine in 1 year than all the deaths throughout history of cannabis.
Hi, sorry, do you mind if I interrupt here? Are you part of the conference here? We just have a private conference going on.
Yeah, I know you.
It was open to public consultation, right? Like
I could have been an applicant, but the city of Vancouver charged me $35,000 a year licensing for my dispensary, so I had to close it due to discrimination.
Like, I don't want to paraphrase you, Dave, but I think his concern is just that the regulations could be set up in a way that would be very inclusive to get people in, and then you could use the regulatory framework to circumvent the unnecessary need for criminal justice, which has not happened. There's still people being arrested. Like, so, first step, you could just say, come on in, step number one, and then you can work on every other piece. I don't want to paraphrase Dave, but it seems like that would be a solution to both of them.
Why are you being as exclusive as possible when you could be being as inclusive as possible?
So the whole point of the meeting and these sessions that we've been doing is we've put in place a special license, this micro license, to try and create a pathway for people to join the legal market that the Cannabis Act.
I'm
has
hearing
created.
from the people in that room, or some of them, that you've been now taking that away.
No, that's exactly why we're here, is to explain how it works, what it takes.
But you have to have all your infrastructure set up, and you can't get the infrastructure unless you have the license. You can't get the license, you have the infrastructure. You've created a catch-22.
The catch-22, every other regulated business, you apply for your license once you're ready to go. So if you know, to draw the analogy.
But you've created artificial need for infrastructure that's beyond the capacity of most people to be able to afford.
That's your view. We've created.
Oh, is that the best you can do from one human to another? That's your view. You won't talk about the veracity of that view, your own personal perspective. Do you agree or disagree, or are you just neutral bureaucrat who kind of facilitates the genocide of the herbally autonomous without taking a personal view of it?
So two things. Legislation and regulations have gone through. They've followed the process that we follow as a country to put legislation in place. It's in place. So we're here to talk about how people operate within.
What's my role
the other thing
as an activist who studied the task force?
The other thing I would say is, for those who are growing for their personal medical need, we have a whole separate program that's been around for
talking about people who've been
So
feeding
if
their
you
families on this for decades, for
that's
generations. Well, no, that's what you're talking about in there.
Talking about
The income.
micro-licenses.
People allowed to make a living off cannabis. They're co-evolutionary plant
I'm
partners.
just trying to understand. You talked about
What is my
medical
role?
and genocide and
Yeah, well,
autonomous,
if you treat cannabis, which is a soft drug, like a hard drug, and get people to accept these arbitrary rules that are based on lies, Reefer Madness 2.0, whether you acknowledge it exists or not, it does exist. And my role as a pot activist, to represent my people, is to challenge you. And when you try to lay this stigma down that, cannabis causes so much harm, you should stick to the regs so you don't harm people. Well, what was
so the quality
the overdose,
stuff,
overuse,
but listen,
deaths
the quality
over the last
control system that we have is basically the same one that exists for food, exists
No.
for medical devices,
No.
exists for
How many? What's the plant limit on coffee bean trees?
There's no plant limit.
Exactly.
There's no plant limit for someone who gets a cannabis license.
There is a plant limit for home grows.
Sure there is, because that's based on medical
What's the
needs.
plant limit for home grows of coffee beans, coffee trees? None.
You're not taking
Zero.
coffee for medical reasons.
It's a stimulant. Cannabis is a soft drug. Coffee is a soft drug. Okay?
So the commercial
equal
program
regulatory
is set up for people to
necessity.
make cannabis products
You-
to sell to other people.
You're
right?
selling a lie that cannabis requires all this tight regulations to save the kids from being stupid and crazy. That's your role, and my role is to expose you.
The quality control of any product that gets marketed is very similar. If you want to open a butcher shop, you're going to be subject to regulation on sanitation.
I would not be
quality
opposed to fair
control.
trade organic coffee bean rules being superimposed on cannabis. That's not what is happening here. Teens can still get arrested for pot. How many teens are arrested for possession of coffee beans last year? None. Zero.
no
People can get... That's all the regulations you need to keep people safe from bad cannabis, organic, fair trade, coffee bean regs. Anything else is just Trudeau's friends trying to get a captive market so they can make money off other people's misery, and you're facilitating it.
So the
That's
whole reason
your
we're
job.
here, we've set up these micro licenses to try and broaden the base of supply.
But you made it impossible with the catch-22 that you think, as long as I say, well, that's your view, you're off the hook. No, you're the seller of the catch-22. You, sir, are here to betray all the farmers and gardeners of the world, to set up this model so the rest of the countries can point to Canada and say, well, it's a progressive country, and use the same model to make it for rich people only to grow and sell cannabis. That's your job. Don't you have any remorse? Can you look at yourself at night and say, I'm here doing good things on planet Earth? Or do you sometimes get a little feeling inside you that maybe you're doing something wrong? No? Nothing? Not a human? Just a bureaucrat? It's like the Eichmann of Canada. Facilitating a different kind of genocide. Not so much
May I borrow
no killing.
you? You promised me 5 minutes.
No
and I
killing.
packed my suitcases and I'm going to leave.
Okay.
Hey, Burinder.
Who are you?
Burinder.
What do you do?
Nice to meet you. I'm Niche Canada.
What is that?
Nonprofit, just trying to educate the rest of Canada on legalization.
Okay.
Okay, nice to meet. But I'm going to steal him now if it's okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm not getting anything out of him.
Nice to meet you.
Oh, I bet. You haven't heard the last of me, buddy.
So I think probably why everybody's here today is partly to hear from us a little bit about the announcements that we made last week and some of the thinking behind those and what the implications of that will be for anybody who is an applicant within the process. So we did announce changes to our licensing process last week. The reason that we took that under consideration and did proceed with the changes, we were hearing a lot of feedback from both internally. We did a little bit of a look at kind of what was in our queue, what submissions had we reviewed, and what was the kind of end result of those decisions. So we did we spent quite a bit of time looking at the number of submissions that we were receiving in on a monthly basis. We obviously had a fairly long queue of some of the standard applications, and also looking at our capacity kind of month over month, how many decisions could we make based on our processing time for applications. We also looked at just over the past number of years of submissions that we had actually looked at, how many of them came into us with a final evidence package, and we're in a place where they were actually able to be a fully operational business. And what we found with that is about 70% of the applications that we reviewed over the last couple of years have not come back into us with a final evidence package, and some of those date almost to 3 years ago. And so we've gone through that full process of doing a detailed review of their submission, but they have not gone ahead to build a facility and come back with that evidence package. So obviously there was a concern from our perspective about the amount of time and effort we were putting into submissions that were not really ready to be operational as a business. And the downstream consequence of that is that if you were a new applicant coming in, or you were an applicant that did have a business that was operational and ready to go, in some cases you could have been waiting 18 months to 2 years for us even to pick up your submission and have a look at it.
All right. So there you go. Disrupting David.
We disheveled everything
David
in here when we were
disrupts.
watching that video.
I am a shit disturber, and he was a shit that needed disturbing.
Well, you stirred.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Stirred his
Yeah,
poopy.
that poor guy ended up mayo chupped by the end of that.
I felt good. That
All over his
someone had
face.
to say it to his face.
He got a little on him.
Someone
Look
had
up-
to say it to his
look
face. I
up
called him
mayo
the
chup.
Eichmann of Canada.
And look at the Cree translation of mayo chup if you want to know the
Let's
answer
catch up
to
in
that.
Mayo in case you wanted to know.
riddle
Popular
joke.
in European nations.
The
Sure.
Dana Larson's
soulless,
wandering around in the background.
the soulless
He's in the
bureaucrat
green
that
screen.
facilitates genocide. Anyway, you've been saying the G word a lot lately. Genocide here and genocide there. I saw in your tweet.
David,
Genocided a guy
David,
the
you
other
did a
night.
great job.
Here, take the mic.
Just want to say, David, you did a fantastic job.
Yeah, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Killing
these
him.
guys
Truth to
have
power.
to hear the truth.
Pointed questions.
Yeah, they have to hear this stuff.
I wasn't even invited there. They were like, "Oh, it's just people who want to have a pot business."
You're like, yeah, that's
I
me.
wanted to have a pot business, but he charged
We've
me
had pot
The
business.
more,
5,000. I said,
I want that to happen at every single place this guy goes to.
exactly.
That's what needs to happen. Yeah. Hi, Dana Larson.
Dana Larson in the house.
Hello. Good
How's it
evening,
going?
good afternoon, good
I like
morning.
your shirt.
Yeah, it's a good shirt.
And good night. What I like about it is I can get a little bit of a burning thing on it and it won't burn a hole in it.
That's good.
What,
I bought
Kevlar?
like 5 shirts the other day and I put one on and before I was going to go out and I lit a joint and leaned back or I picked up a roach off my desk, leaned back and it was a roach with
That's
some
your
hash
test?
in it. First time I wore the shirt, within a minute, 3 burn holes right on my chest. Not this one, it's a different polyester. And those ones, the
Jesus.
tiniest little flaming thing makes an instant hole,
Oh, yeah.
right? So I'm like,
Maybe you need a roach bib.
Yeah, or shirts with like holes already in them, like part of the design, little burn marks pattern.
You could resell
I thought
them
about
on,
that.
like,
I thought about a
online.
burn mark pattern. I don't know.
It could be like
I'm not sure how big of a
chic
market
and
there is for people who burn a
You
lot
just
of
need-
holes in their
You
clothes.
need a bib made of
Might just be
silicone,
me.
like the silicone dab mats and stuff. Just
Yeah.
make one out of that. And
When I'm home, I just try to smoke naked, and then nothing gets burned.
Yeah.
Chest
At least
burns.
not my clothes, anyways.
Ash bib.
All
Ash
right,
bib.
all
The
right.
ash
A little
bib by
diversion
Menon.
there from the serious
So that's
topic.
cool.
So
Yeah.
We're here for
Yes.
seriousness, though. Come on
We're
now.
very, very serious on this show. And
totally serial.
but so speaking of very, very serious, Melissa DeGenova,
What a
who
bitch.
is
There's a serious problem.
she's got serious issues.
She fucking does not like no fun of no sorts.
Dana, tell the people what happened in
Thought I was
Vancouver
bad.
City Council just a couple days ago.
Oh, I don't really even pay that much attention to it. I thought I probably should have gone down there and said something, you know. I knew she had a motion going, but it was
Smart
supposed to be
drink.
the first day, then it got delayed, and they talked about it.
We didn't.
next
Was there the
time-
opportunity for us to speak to it?
I'm not sure if we could have lined up to
No.
speak or if it would have made any difference, but I didn't go and speak to it anyways.
I didn't
but,
either, but
whatever.
It
The
would have made
motion
no
had a
difference.
bunch of stuff in it, and a lot of it got chopped out. So some of it
Yes.
passed, but a lot of it did not pass. And she wanted the city. Like a lot of it's just asking city staff to do stuff, and I think the staff are so tired of being like the park board passed the thing. Tell them to not bring Cypress Hill. So we get an email from the staff saying, "Hey, the park board asked us to tell you not to bring Cypress Hill," and we're like, "All right, thanks." And then that's it, right? And it's ridiculous. And so they've asked the staff to investigate the possibility of suing 420 and the organizers.
Yes.
Melissa wanted them to go
possibility.
after every single contractor, every single performer, every single person that sets up a booth, and to try to pursue legal action. Or if that same contractor does something
brilliant.
for the city, they would cut them off and not let them have any city contracts or
she's
do
a
whatever
smart
they
one.
can. And so
Yeah,
that
she's
part
a
didn't
genius.
pass about punishing everybody involved in the event. But they
No.
are looking at ways of recouping the cost. And as we know, the only cost involved that we don't cover is the policing bill.
Cops.
Otherwise, we cover everything else. Our policing bill is easily 3 or 4 times higher than events which are way larger than ours. I'm not really keen on giving the police money for our protest anyways, but if they had a reasonable amount, maybe we could talk about something. But when it's like... And then they spend a lot of money at the art gallery every year. And last year, it's especially egregious because the city and the police together, city engineers and police, spent $70,000 at the art gallery trying to stop any protest from happening there when none was scheduled.
70,000.
Nope, nothing was scheduled there. Nobody was. In previous years, there has been some protest at the art gallery on 420, which I don't see that we're responsible for.
70,000.
By any conception.
How did they try to stop the protest by burning piles of money?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, yeah,
just blowing
exactly.
smoke at 'em?
Blockade out
Go
of
down.
$100 bills.
They clouded him out with smoke.
You ain't getting
And
nothing.
what's-
No, don't breathe it in. Get
And
out
what's
of here,
crazy
guys.
about it is that the entire policing bill for an event like Car Free Day on Commercial Drive is only $40,000. So they spent almost twice as much trying to stop an event that wasn't planned on happening. And then if it did happen, it wouldn't have been a big deal because those guys, when they were protesting there, they weren't blockading traffic or causing any big disruption. They were just setting up tables and selling weed and having speakers, and it was like a little teeny 420 at the art gallery, right? But
How-
so
how do they
and
calculate
so-
these police costs? Do they
Well,
give any rationale to how
the
things
police
are
do
calculated?
not really. For our thing, it's weird. If you try to ask them about other events, they don't want to tell you because they say, "Oh, it's a private thing between us and Car Free Day or us and Pride. We can't tell you how much we spent policing there. You have to go ask the event how much they spent, right?" And Car Free Day is almost bankrupted by this 40 grand, and yet they want us to pay 70 grand for a thing that isn't even where we are.
Yeah.
Right. So and I don't think we should be paying the policing at all. I really think we should be getting policing costs down in our city by giving the cops less money and reducing the whole police budget in many ways.
Man, the police-
But anyway, so Melissa's been very like other city councils people. They kind of let go of this after a while, but she has just got this and will not let go. She's constantly on Twitter tweeting about it. And of course, to me, it's really because it's the West End. And those are the rich people in this city. Those are the voters. It's a troubling loss of park space. Well, you go down to Oppenheimer Park a few blocks from here. It's full of tents from homeless people.
Fenced
I have nothing
off,
against
too.
those people staying there. They need a place to stay. But if they're worried about a troubling lack of park space, I mean, it's a real dichotomy, A little bit of cannabis smoke in the West End. Oh, my God, what about the children? The smell is awful. But the East Vancouver can smell like a chicken rendering plant for decades, and nobody cares. And other parts, every city's got smells and different things. So it's really, to me, about being in the West End and about stigma against cannabis. But she obviously feels there's votes or something to be gained by going after us.
That's what it is. That's why the exact reason she's doing it. And she's done this before in the past with other issues related to cannabis, including the dispensaries, where she tried to make that into hay.
She's very disingenuous, right? Because
Very
she
disingenuous.
does show up. We had an open house for dispensaries last year for city councils before the election to come. I mean, to her credit, she came to engage with dispensaries, but she's also someone who was pushing the city to pass bylaws saying this is before, like in the last few years, that every licensed dispensary could only sell LP cannabis, which means that there would be we can't exist because that's a contradiction, right? We can't do that. And
it's so
trying
ridiculous.
to, when we asked her where's the suitable spot for 420, she said some other city. So it's not about like finding a better spot in Vancouver. It's about them not wanting this event anywhere in the city, right? And
yes,
this year especially, but every year really, but this year especially, 420 got major international media coverage and really cements Vancouver's reputation as a cool, cannabis-friendly place to visit. And cannabis is legal now, so we should be promoting this at Vancouver as a tourist destination. If you love cannabis, come here.
City
we
should
do
be cutting you guys a
We've
check.
got dispensaries. We've got a cool scene. We've got skiing and
tourism.
water.
It just shows you that, see, what happens. It's funny because in the city of Vancouver, it's different than other cities. We have municipal political parties. And there's a reason that political parties are bad and that a lot of cities don't allow that because they start working together, the different councillors of different groups, and they make these longer term strategies that are more about gaining ground for their party than about the actual legitimacy of the issue or not. And so, like, these guys are working together. Melissa DeGenova is working with John Kupar, who's on the park board, and Sarah Kirby Young, who's another councillor. They're NPA members, and this is a larger strategy where they're using it to attack the mayor. And you see how every time they talk about the issue, there's all this, well, this shows lack of leadership from the mayor and all this kind of stuff.
None of them can often say what they would do. They would say, oh, we'd be a leader. But, like, the reality is, we put the city in a very hard place in terms if they want to be hostile to us. If they want to like us, we put them in a wonderful spot. We put on a huge free outdoor concert that costs the city nothing but policing.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's very hard for them to stop us. So people say, well, they should go shut it all down. Well, what are they going to do? We're pretty determined. And, and this is not something that was gained just we decided to go do this. It took 25 years of incremental change, little bit at a time. And David Malma-Levine, who was here, was a big part of that. Building that safe space for cannabis dealing, for buying and selling cannabis at 420 and at other events, and creating that circle and that zone, and then building on that. And if the park board said, look, we're telling the police are going to blockade Sunset Beach, we're not going to cooperate, we're not going to let you go there. Okay, well, we're not going to start a riot. We would just go somewhere else. Or we go back to the art gallery where we were causing way more disruption and way more problems.
Shutting it down.
Yeah,
and I do
terrible.
think 420 will probably be a little smaller next year. I mean, we'll see what happens. It'd be nice if it could be even bigger than ever, but we know Cypress Hill coming was a huge part of why there was a big crowd, absolutely.
Yeah.
But Saturday also helps a lot too. We'll see what happens next year. It's a long way away, although it's also right around the corner in some ways. But
less than a year now.
It's Monday.
Days left.
We missed the Sunday because of leap year. Because it's leap year next year, otherwise we'd get another day of the weekend in, unfortunately. But
well,
we'll see what happens. And,
Well, be 420 all week then.
but I expect. Also, it's 420 all month.
I have a feeling
next
it's
year.
going to look a lot like last year. Like it's going to probably be big again, and it's probably going to be everything.
It could be bigger than ever. I'm not really sure what's going to happen, right? And it depends who we get and how things go. I expect to be back at Sunset Beach again, and I mean, if someone can point to a better spot, then we'll move to that better spot. But in all these years, including when we first chose to move to Sunset Beach, there is no better spot, and we all know that.
Exactly.
What are the chances we can pull it off at Melissa's house?
That's where we should go.
Well, then we should talk about this off camera. But I mean, I'd like to think about what our theme is for next year, what we're going to focus on, what we talk about. I mean, and a big challenge with this event, and other protests have this too, are things like the Pride Parade. They hate it when I talk about them, but they struggle with those also. The tension between trying to protest and your political message, and trying to raise the money to put on your event. Mm-hmm. I'm like, let's put a big banner over the stage that says "No more drug war," and it's like, and then you're like, well, that's going to cost us a whole bunch of money because we could sell that banner space, and then we need that money to pay the city, and we got to do this, and we got to do that, and it's like the message. I think the message is the action. We're creating an amazing free space. We're creating a chance for people to buy and sell and share cannabis in a safe and open way that we want legalization to be. But we're also thinking all the time, we got to make the money to pay these bills. We got to pay the city. We got to pay for this. We got to cover security.
Exactly.
And so, it's a real challenge, right? But
and it really is. I mean, and that's what it comes down to. It's funny because they criticize us first of all, they criticize us, well, you guys come in and you make a big mess in the park and it's not safe because you don't have enough security. So we sell ads and we raise enough money to do all the things they want, including protect the grass with Duradeck, have a huge amount of security, pay for everything, all of the toilets and all the added stuff that they want, that they criticize us for not having, and then they criticize us for having to raise all this money, and it's worth too much money now. You've done all this stuff, and like it doesn't really matter what we do. They're going to find a way to criticize.
Some people, anyways, think or claim, that the event's making us a ton of money and pay. I wish it did. It'd be great if at the end of everything we were like, hey, we got 50 grand left over. What are we going to do with that? Let's put it to a legal challenge. Let's give it to charity. Let's do whatever. But we know we're still waiting for the final numbers. But we know this year we're probably about 10 grand in the hole or so.
We are about 10 grand in the
more.
hole.
That's not
terrible, but
unsolvable, but it's
right.
way worse than 10 grand in black.
It's a piss off, and because at every turn, people don't realize what goes into actually running one of these big events,
so
and
complicated,
how you get jacked on every turn by everybody involved, and it keeps getting more and more expensive every time you do it.
And the city's pretty fair in the bill they give us, other than the absurdity of the policing, which the city itself doesn't really cover. But the park board bill is full of all weird things and extra fees and $10,000 emergency fund that we don't really know what it does, and no one else gets charged that, and they only started charging.
I think we figured out what that is. That's them going door to door, essentially telling people that we suck, or telling people that 420's coming to your neighborhood. It's dangerous. There's going to be smoke in the air. Clear the area.
And then they give them the number. So they make a flyer. Then they give them. They tell them to call 311 to complain.
Yeah.
And then they say, "Oh, 420 got so many complaints. Look how much people complain about it."
Yeah, because
they solicit the
told
complaints,
people to,
and then we pay for them to solicit complaints. But they still, there's a lot of
working in this like activism community gives us, I think, a good education on how government does things. This isn't just to us, probably. They do this with everything. It's this weird thing where they use taxpayer dollars to propagandize against the taxpayers, and that's just how it works. Like I guess it's an old trick.
They've increased police budgets across Canada by $300 million to pay for legalization, which should be the opposite. They should be cutting all the cop budgets by 15% with legalization. And then you protest against that, and they complain, oh, you're not giving the police enough money.
Yeah.
I think it's a credit to our event that they used to complain about garbage, about minors. A lot of those complaints were invalid, but about minors, about garbage, about people going to the hospital. And now we've solved. I mean, there's none of that happens anymore, if it ever did. But we've really got it under control. All they're left to complain about is you're not giving the police enough money. And I think that's pretty darn good that we can have an event with 150,000 people, totally unpermitted, cannabis everywhere, totally, incredibly safe, well organized, and the only complaint people have is you need to give the police more money. And we really, I'm glad the police are there, but we really just need like 6 cops or 10 cops, right? So if they made 2 arrests this year, most of the stuff our security deals with, if we had less police there, we could hire more private security to make sure we got things under control. We get along well with the police, right? I have no problems with the cops at 420. Other than that, it costs a lot of money, and we don't really need all those cops
there. Were some cops at 420 early in the morning that were causing problems. Traffic cops who weren't doing what they were supposed to do. But we did get help. We ended up getting help from the cops that we knew who came in and changed the situation and also apologized to us and said that shouldn't have happened and that it won't happen next year. But
I actually walked by a bunch of those cops on my way down in the morning, and there was 2 motorcycle cops sitting on their bikes. And as I walked by, there was one of the cops that was, I guess, causing problems. And I didn't know what was going on. And people, I'm like, what's going on? How come you guys are unloading here? Why aren't you guys down at the beach? They're all up the hill. And, there's cops down there giving us tickets. And it's like, what the fuck? That's weird. And I'm walking. And as I walk by, the one cop who's hassling people gives me like a look and is about to say something. And he's across the street, and the other 2 cops I know are beside me on their bikes, and I hear the one cop say to his buddy, how much you bet that guy's going to tell that guy to fuck off? And I just turned and looked at the other cop on the bike and smiled, because I have my leathers on and stuff, right? You figured,
I basically told him to fuck off myself. I was really upset because those guys were being, not only were they doing something they weren't supposed to, but they were being extremely rude to everybody.
Oh, yeah, he's being a real dick. Actually, and another cop apparently put him in his place. He said, "Oh no, that guy doesn't have that authority." And
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
They went over and took care of it and told those guys to. The cops basically said, "Shoot."
Yeah, there's miscommunications or lack of understanding, or people going off on their own sometimes.
Own
the
mission.
Cops, and they need to have a better communication on their end, I think, as to what they're supposed to be doing and not doing. And
That's interesting to see that happen because they seemed like they didn't. Those earlier cops just didn't realize or didn't know what was going on. I'm like, don't you guys talk about this earlier? He's like, well, the traffic crew isn't in on the same meetings that we have, so they didn't get the note about this.
There's traffic cops.
Yeah.
They didn't get the memo.
They didn't get the memo, exactly, literally. Yeah, so 420 aftermath, though, I think we did a great job. Everything seemed to go really smoothly at the event. Cleaned it all up.
So nervous because we know that if any other, people get stabbed at the fireworks. It's like, oh, someone got stabbed at the fireworks. That's shitty. Someone gets stabbed at 420.
It'll be the biggest thing ever.
The soul, that's huge, right? Like we have, it's way more.
They'll use it to propagandize
one guy
against
got
us.
punched at one point, and that guy was fine. It turned out, but I'm like, oh my god, one punch at 150,000 people is not very many punches, but that could be the punch that changes the whole perception of the event, right? And so, we were very, just an incredibly so smooth. 42 people went to the hospital. Not one of them was admitted to a bed. They were all in emergency, and all were sent out immediately, which is, I think, incredibly safe.
Yep.
None of them were minors. Not the police didn't. Did the police report to you any sales to minors anywhere? They didn't.
Nope.
Last year they reported one, I think, to you, right? Last year there was one
last year there was one, and they actually last year when they did it, they came and got me, and they didn't go down themselves. They just came and got me and they said, "Hey, we saw that guy selling to minors. Can you go ask him to stop?" And so
we had one last year and zero this year. We had extra signs all over and everything.
Yeah, there were signs everywhere.
And I'm sure the odd kid might be able to score some weed, just like kids can get
like the
alcohol. Yes. And in fact, if you look at the track record of liquor stores and nightclubs and stuff, their record is terrible. Whenever they send in minors or do tests on them, they have huge fail rates, like 50-60% failure rates to ask for ID, and nobody really cares. And then one 16-year-old gets a joint at 420, and oh my god,
fucking hell freezes
irresponsible people, right? And
it's pretty.
I was very happy with 420 this year overall. It was great. You did a great job making it all happen. A lot of fighting the media, though, and a lot a hostility. And more than
Danny,
usual,
you did a great job fighting in the media, and
but
dealing
really
with all
personal attacks. Like it's a lot of journalists and reporters, like Keith Baldry, who's a anchor, telling me to grow up on Twitter and being quite. And I'm not. Jody occasionally calls people's names a little bit. I never call anybody names or anything. And Linda Steele banning me and blocking me and Jody on Twitter and doing so many stories on this. I wish they covered the rest of the policing budget as intently as they cover this tiny 0.0005% that gets spent on policing 420. Maybe we'd get our policing costs under control in this city. But anyways, I'm thinking more about my drug testing machine and new plans coming up than 420. It's it's like
but I mean, there is this motion passed by the city council.
I'm pretty sure city staff are going to tell them we have no legal chance of forcing a protest to pay for policing. And what's interesting, I was looking in the paper that Burnaby had this fight with because Burnaby was opposing the pipeline, the city. The federal government sent extra cops in against the protests, and then they were billing the city of Burnaby millions of dollars. And Derek Horgan, the mayor of Burnaby, was like, "I don't want to pay for this. We support those protesters. We don't like that pipeline." So this idea of using policing of protests as a way of punishing protests and a way of financially punishing people who want to stand up against stuff is not just limited to cannabis. It seems like a pretty common tactic and
bigger issue. So if they want to sue us, then I guess we'll go to court and we'll fight over it.
I mean, it would. They're not going. I mean, I can't believe city staff is going to say that's a good idea. Our lawyers think you should spend that, and that it will be cost effective.
Well, I don't know. Sadhu's in charge.
Sadhu's not. I mean, he's he was kind of a jerk when we first met with him that very first time.
Yeah.
That was not a good meeting, and he was kind of making fun of us and mocking. But I mean, over the since then, he hasn't been bad. He hasn't really, when we. I don't know. He's been all right. I mean, I'm not.
I guess
he's way
we
better.
We haven't really had any interaction with him. The only interaction I had with him was about closing the dispensaries down when he was being disingenuous. And he's like, "We're like, well, why are you telling your lawyers to go after our dispensaries and tell us that we have to shut down?" He's like, "Oh, well, we wouldn't come and shut you guys down." And we're like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, that would be the province that would do it." And so, but he's just like, I don't know. He's not he's not a very
He's not like a
friendly-
strong ally or anything like that.
No, he's
I'm
not a
sorry,
strong
but-
ally.
But, we're not afraid to be protesting at the courthouse either.
Yeah, right. No, we're not. No, which we have a lot with the megaphone.
So yeah,
True.
But if we even get to the courthouse on this one, I think it'd be funny.
Yeah, I wish
There's no
I really
protest
did.
down there.
I do wish that I would have been there for the council thing, just so we could have been there to see what happened. But
Yeah, we probably, but unfortunately, when you would have gone to the first meeting, then it gets held over to the next one. You got to go back, and it's like, that's
That's true.
important, I guess, but it's also
this shit takes a long
lot
time.
of time sitting around there. And stuff,
So,
and
but
I'm not-
Dana,
no,
you mentioned your drug testing machine.
Yeah.
What's going on with that?
So I started a new project last week. It's online at getyourdrugstested.com, and basically
Good web.
getyourdrugstested.com. And my dispensary and I invested in this machine. It's called the FTIR spectrometer. FTIR stands for Fourier Transform Infrared. And what that means is it shines an infrared laser. It's about the size of a bread box. You put a tiny little sample, like less than 0.1 gram or 0.01 grams.
Grains of salt.
Yeah, onto the little spot. It shines an infrared laser on it, which then.
Do you crush it first or something?
Well, yeah, you want it to be powdered.
yeah.
Normally, you're dealing. It's not really for cannabis. It's more for powders, MDMA, cocaine, amphetamines,
Pills.
heroin, stuff like that.
Prescription drugs.
Yeah, any kind of chemical type drugs. And
yeah.
it shines a light through it. The light's refracted through a diamond in it, and then it analyzes the light spectrum that comes out, matches it against the library. These things were actually originally used not for drugs, but for mining samples and for analyzing chemicals. And I was listening to a news story the other day. This woman's analyzing sea sand to figure out how many micro granules of plastic are in there using this machine.
Whoa.
And so you can do different things with it, but we're using it for drug analysis. And this is being offered in BC a little bit now. The province has a few of these machines. And if you go down to Insight or some of the other overdose prevention sites for a few hours on certain days, you can get your stuff tested for free.
Yeah.
And that's great. But the reality is that people who aren't injection drug users are highly unlikely to go into that kind of place and get their stuff tested. And I made the service available to all of Canada. Anybody can mail me in their drug sample. So we just need 0.01 grams, 10 milligrams. Very small amount.
That's not much.
We've already had over a dozen samples in the mail that have arrived. We can test it on the machine. The same day we get your sample in the mail, we'll test it and have you the result back like that same day. It only takes about 5 minutes to run the test. It doesn't actually cost anything to run the test other than paying the person to operate the machine. So we ask for a $5 donation per test just to cover that cost. But we give you the answer regardless of whether you donate or not. It's not mandatory. And I think it's great. It helps people find out what they're taking. And, we also use fentanyl test strips as well because the machine, if something's under like 4%, it can struggle sometimes to locate it in the sample. So a fentanyl test strip just gives us an extra level of knowledge about whether there's fentanyl in there or not.
Yeah.
But it's very good for, there's a lot of things other than fentanyl, right? You can get levacimol in your cocaine. It's like a deworming type thing. It's not good. Or just people will put caffeine and like numbing agents into their cocaine or to stimulate cocaine. You get something called PMA instead of MDMA. And PMA has kind of similar effects, but you're way more likely to overdose and die on it than on MDMA.
Yeah,
So-
it's the
So a
unstable
lot of these
version
things-
with
So
the-
this
a lot
thing
of
has a
these
database inside of it. Essentially, what it's doing is taking a photo, matching it up to a photo that's in the database of the same kind of
it
molecules.
analyzes the
right?
light spectrum, and then you can kind of pull out. You can sort of play with it. So it's 90% MDMA. Let's pull out that part and see what the other light spectrum is and
See what the
analyze.
other 3%
And so it's not. You don't need like a PhD to run the machine, but you do need a fair amount of training and expertise in how to do it. But
My question
how
is,
to
how
read
many
it.
different substances does it have in the database?
Thousands.
Thousands.
Millions.
Yeah, and you can get more. That we have all the common drug ones, so it's also buffers and
Pharmaceutical,
things like that too. But if we were doing it for mining samples, we would get a different database
Right.
because we wouldn't be looking for cocaine, right? So
Right.
we'd be looking for minerals and other samples or whatever.
Gold,
right?
cocaine.
Yeah, so you have a different.
You
But
can-
basically, our
we
We have
database
cocaine
covers
mines, but behind
all
the
of
house.
all of the known
Cocaine mine.
narcotics, drugs, all of the
Prescription
entheogen psychedelics, everything similar, and then anything that's used for buffers and stuff. And actually, sometimes you find new things. And so we've talked to the BC Centre on Substance Use, which has been very friendly about this and kind of helped me get some of this organized. And they are creating a database of new drugs that they find, and they're going to share that with us. So if there's some new designer drug and you're not sure what it is, you can add things to the
That's
database
very cool.
and that. Sometimes it can, sometimes it gives you more information than others depending on what the substance is, but it's really helpful. To know what you're taking and to be able to make responsible choices.
For sure.
They have this at music festivals, a few of them. Shambhala has had it for a year or two.
Anchors
does that. We're looking at maybe taking it to some other music festivals. The difference, if you're doing it legally through the government or in a way, you're only supposed to do it at overdose prevention sites. And so when they do it at a music festival, they get that spot designated as an OPS. And then they can legally handle and give back drugs to people and handle it. Otherwise, it's trafficking. I'm not doing any of that. So when I ask someone to mail me drugs in the mail, that is trafficking. I don't return them because I'm not mailing stuff back. But at the other things, they give your sample back to you if you want it.
Right.
But I don't really, I don't really care. I think it's highly unlikely that any police are going to be like, hey, this guy's testing drugs for people to help prevent overdoses. Let's go get him. I mean, maybe in a different place, at a different time, or in the U.S. or some countries, absolutely, they would come after me. But in Vancouver and in Canada, in the middle of an overdose crisis, I just don't think anybody's going to complain too much about this, right? So,
no, well, what a great idea.
Technically, it is,
Well,
and all the harm reduction groups
it's
I talk
helpful,
to
Dana.
are all like, that's
I'm
great.
glad you're doing that because it provides a very helpful service to people because right now you never know what's in your stuff. Now, the other question I have, though, quickly is what I've read about fentanyl is that it doesn't always gather in consistent sort of ways in a substance that it's in. So you'll get some spots that have fentanyl in it and some that have zero in it or something.
For sure. And so we gave a lot of caveats with this test. It's possible, even if your pill is poorly made, that this part you scraped off is not the same as the other half of the pill.
Right.
If it's got hot. So we can't guarantee stuff, and we tell people all of these things. This is not a guarantee. These are the restrictions, but it's better than not knowing anything.
That's true.
Right? But we don't say, oh, this is a guarantee safe. You're going to be fine. Take as much of that. And also what it does allow us to do as well is give them information on the substance. Even if it turns out, hey, it's pure MDMA, we can also say, if you're going to take MDMA, here's a few good links to read. Here's a few safety tips to keep in mind when you're going to take this stuff, right? So regardless of whatever the result is, we can also give them the result. We also give them information on what the result means, on how to use this drug safely. Maybe it's not what you thought it was. Maybe you shouldn't take it at all, we would recommend. But if you're going to take it anyways, here's ways to make sure you only take a half a dose or try to give them as much guidance as possible. Ultimately, it's up to the person to make their own decision. We're just trying to help inform that decision. It's, ideally these drugs would be tested and made in a lab properly before sale and not afterwards, but it's not that way, so we're doing the best we can with it. It's not perfect, but I think it's really helpful and beneficial in a lot of ways.
Oh, I think it's a great idea.
But you do have to be aware of the limitations of the testing that you get.
Well, that's very cool. So get your drugs tested.
GetYourDrugsTested.com.
.com.
And we've just got I got a bit of media coverage and we got something out that way. But the main thing about this is letting people know that it exists, right? So I've got posters that are going up all across the country. I think we got some up in Ottawa already. Others will be going up now or in the next week or two. They'll be going up for the next 3 weeks or so. I've been contacting every student newspaper in the country. A lot of them are off for the summer, but we're going to get ads in the fall, and some of them are around. So. And if you're watching this and if you've got any kind of if you want some postcards or posters or flyers or you've got a group or a harm reduction thing or a bunch of friends who like getting high or whatever, then, contact me by email or go to Get Your Drugs Tested and contact us there. We're still printing some of the stuff up, but I've already got a bunch of requests. I've had a nurse in Winnipeg contact me who works as a harm reduction center nurse, and she wants to send samples in from people there, and they don't have access to any kind of machine. And the legal ones, they don't let you send things in the mail because that's not allowed, but I don't care, right? So I'm able to operate outside the system a little bit and do a better job because I'm not constrained by the bureaucracy.
Saving lives.
Beautiful. That's very cool. Now, Dana, you have other projects on the go right now as well. Are you not over at High Score, which is at 649 East Hastings here in Vancouver, our retro video arcade and vapor lounge? Right next door to that, there's an empty building. What's going on there?
I don't want to talk about that too much right now.
No?
I've
Okay.
got new projects coming, but I want to wait until things are ready to
happening?
go because
Okay.
I don't want any hassle from the city or anybody right now.
I got
But
you.
I do have some exciting new projects coming. want to push forward sort of psychedelics and entheogens. It's no secret I've been talking people should be doing this kind of stuff. Microdosing is becoming very popular. I've been talking to people, actually, this is not going to be anything to do with that location, but there's been talk about trying to open an opiate dispensary or a heroin dispensary or heroin compassion club in Vancouver.
Oh, wow.
Groups have been bringing this up, and I've been saying, I have no expertise in that area or any of that kind of stuff, but since I've been musing aloud about this, people have been contacting me, hey, I've got access to opium, I've got access to heroin, and so, it's something, it's more challenging than cannabis to sell for a lot of reasons, but it's also important, maybe even more important in some ways, because, people aren't dying from cannabis overdoses. It's all important. I don't want to get into which is more important. It's all important, and it's all interconnected, right?
Yeah.
So I've been really thinking about trying to find a way to create a safe supply of opiates, and I'd love it to include opium tea and smoking opium. For some people, they're going to need to inject, and that's fine too, all the options, but definitely I think having non-injectable, safer options should be part of it. And I've launched this campaign to get people to grow opium poppies for me.
Yes.
You got to grow a lot of poppies to really make enough for a real supply, right? So it's a real campaign, partly symbolic and partly, real, because I do want to get poppies in that in. But
what's the campaign? What's it called?
Well, it's Overgrow Canada. It's really part of the Overgrow Canada campaign.
Right.
I've still been giving away the cannabis seeds, 10 million seeds since 2016. But then I also told people, and the poppy one's a bit different, because Overgrow Canada with the cannabis was about growing cannabis in public places, normalizing it, overgrowing it by making it not a big deal, growing openly. Opium poppies are already like that. People grow opium poppies everywhere. The poppy campaign is more about growing opium poppies and then harvesting the heads when the time is right and sending it to me so I can make some kind of opium tea out of it and get an opium supply of some sort of homegrown opium supply. So it's a different kind of focus, but to me it's sort of the same thing, trying to normalize access to these plant medicines in their whole form.
Going back to
So-
the opium dens of Vancouver.
How do you make opium tea?
Well, you can. If you can just cut when the poppy is ripe and it's full of the seeds are starting. You can cut it, and then the opium latex will come out, and you can scrape that off. I'm probably not going to do that because that's very time consuming and also very heaty. If you've grown an acre of opium poppies and there's a period of time when they're all sitting there with latex drying on them, you can also just cut off the heads at the right time. Vacuum seal them, send them to me express post or whatever, and you can boil them and extract them out of that way and extract it, making a tea out of it that way. And then you can concentrate that down or dilute it depending what you want. That's probably what I'm going to do, I think. I'm not an expert on making opium. All I know is what I've read on the internet and talked to my friends. But as this comes together, people are coming out of the woodwork saying, that's a good idea, I'll help with that. So I'm pretty confident if I can get the poppies, I can make a decent supply of tea. And if I can make one big batch, then I know it's standardized, I can get it tested, I know exactly how strong it is, and then people who are using can titrate their dosage and hopefully find a dose that works for them. And if I also, I make kratom available as well, and kratom, for those who don't know, is a tree from Southeast Asia. It makes leaves that you powder, make into a tea, or take as a capsule. It's got opiate-like effects, but it doesn't cause overdoses. It's very good for dealing with dope sickness and withdrawal and substitution for opiates. And it also should be made available. It's got a few health issues around it, but compared to opiates, it is incredibly safe. Incredibly safe. And especially kratom and cannabis can help people. Said I'm all for a clean opium supply, but if you can find other things that you can use that give you the same benefits and don't have to involve injecting or taking opiates, that also I think is positive too, right? So I've been bringing in kratom quietly and selling it and giving it away mostly, actually, to a few different overdose sites in the downtown east side. But I want to start bringing more in and selling it and kind of making it available. It's compared to using heroin, it's quite cheap per dose and very effective and really great. So all these things I think should be made available, and I want to help trying to make it happen because waiting for the government to do it is going to be a long time.
So long.
Kidding.
So many deaths.
Tons of opium tea back in the 80s or
1980s.
Back in the early 80s and 90s, we used to raid gardens in Victoria and just grab enough poppy heads, just take them home and
for the
make
weekend.
up a tea, and a couple of us, we'd all just sort of have a cup and
get horizontal.
Oh, totally, that was it. Nap time.
The original lean.
Yeah, it was like we just mash them up.
The
a bit,
true
boil
lean
the shit
down.
out of them,
Yeah.
and then strain them.
Poppy scissor.
Yeah, that's it. And then throw in a tea bag and some honey.
Because you were leaned over.
And like a opium tea has maybe got some issues around it. Use it's not.
It's
safe,
addictive.
obviously. It's not great for your kidneys if you drink a ton of opium tea every day for many years.
No.
But there was actually, if you look historically, when I was researching this, there's a bunch of studies done in the 40s and 50s in Southeast Asia that are all headlined like opium prohibition triggered skyrocketing heroin use in Laos and Vietnam and other areas. When they banned opium, everyone switched to heroin, which only makes sense. The law of prohibition, drugs get stronger.
Similar
and
thing,
even here in Canada, in the early 2000s, there was raids and attacks on the Southeast Asian community that were using Doda, which is just dried opium poppies. You grind them up, you make a tea out of it. It's actually pretty mild. But, it's a good pain reliever. A lot of people working in physical jobs, and in the Southeast Asian community, apparently, it was quite popular. And then they busted a big field growing in Delta. They busted a bunch of guys bringing it into the country. They raided a bunch of people. And if you look at the news for 3 years or so, there's a whole bunch of these Doda busts. Then you look at the news about 5 to 10 years after that, skyrocketing heroin use in the Southeast Asian community. And you read these articles where they talk to this one guy who's like, I used to drink Doda tea. And then I guess I got too hooked on it because when they took it away, I started doing heroin. And when I was on the Doda tea, I was fine. I had a family, I had a job, and life was good. And now I'm injecting heroin. I'm afraid I'm going to die. I've lost my job. My family's all fucked up. And like I said, maybe there was some issues with that guy drinking Doda tea, but they were not that bad. And now we've ruined this guy's life. We've ruined his family. We might kill him. And for what? Like, for no benefit at all. Let him have his Doda tea. Everyone was happy, right? So, this prohibition just leads to worse consequences in every possible way.
It's really true. Every time they crack down, it just makes things worse.
I don't get, I'm also, they're offering hydromorphone to a very limited number of people, like there's 50 or 60 that they're offering this stuff to, and that's great. I totally support that, right? Like, more the better. But I don't get why they only have to offer the most strongest stuff, and they can't offer any weaker stuff or any milder or any safer forms. Why do they only have to offer?
Yeah, you're right.
It's like they want their dose to stay high.
You want people where they are. If people need injectable, you give them that. I'm not saying we should only offer opium tea and not, but should definitely have both. And I mean, I've talked to opium users who tell me, like, when they've had access to opium tea, they stopped injecting. Right. I don't know if that represents 10% or 90% of heroin users, but whatever the number is, get those people some tea, right?
Well, whatever the number is, it makes no difference.
Even if it's one.
So that's amazing. Very cool. So right now people can go to overgrow.com or
overgrowcanada.com.
Canada.com. And get some poppies.
Yeah, we have
seeds.
links there. We're not giving away the seeds ourselves, but we have a bunch of links there, and you can get them for we get them for about $5 or $10 for a huge amount of poppy seeds, and it's not that hard to grow. It takes a bit of effort, but I'm hoping this campaign picks up, and I figure I'll try to, whatever amount I get, I'll try to make it like a year supply per person. So if I'm offering this to somebody, ideally, I'm not just saying, I got enough for a few months, and then you're going to go back to the
one
fentanyl,
try.
right? Yeah, so ideally, if I can get people to switch or to find success using this, I'm hoping I can offer them a year's supply, like, a bit at a time, but over a year, so that when next year's crop comes in, I can offer people continuous access, and
very cool. That's the way to do it. Keep it rolling.
I like this, Dana. You bring back like the whole opium market to Canada.
Getting rid of opium dens was the worst thing we ever did, right?
Yeah.
Every decade since we banned opium, there's been more overdose deaths than the year before. The first ones were reported within 10 years after opium was banned. People started switching to morphine, and overdose deaths started happening. And then from morphine to heroin, and then more, and then from heroin to other synthetic. In the 1990s, it was an overdose crisis where there was about one death a day, and that was considered a crisis. And it was a crisis. And they didn't solve it. Everyone just got used to one death a day. And now if they got back down to one death a day, they would hail that as a huge public health victory. Yeah. Everything is fine now. But really, that's still a crisis level. It should be less than one a year, right? Really, it should be a very, very small number. It's not intrinsic to drug use; it's intrinsic to prohibition, and it's very frustrating. I'm actually focusing some more on this stuff, and I want to start doing I remember when we were doing the occupation of Harper's office for the Mark Emery extradition stuff, and you have a right to occupy political offices, MPs,
Yes.
MLAs. It's
And
public space.
We rolled joints in their offices on their desks.
I know. I was rewatching the video the other day of Jacob and Jody in Stephen Harper's office, and Jacob rolling joints in his office and talking about the stuff. And they have to leave they would try to close. We're going to close early.
Yeah.
Like, no, we're going to stay here till your posted closing hour of 5 o'clock, and then we'll go at 5 because we're not, But we're going to start doing that to, I think, federally and provincially. I think every level of government. As far as I'm concerned, the war on drugs is the genocide of the poor and of the indigenous in Canada and around the world. And so politicians that don't try to stop this are complicit in this happening.
Yes.
And for me, I go to these BC NDP events, and I know a lot of these guys, and they're nice people. They're not, bad people. And some of them, like David Eby, who's our Attorney General, a former head of the BC Civil Liberties Association, he's somebody
he
that
knows.
I respect, and he's done a lot of good work. But he's also, at this point, he's kind of an enemy of legalization because he's the Attorney General of the province. He has the power to tell the police what to do and the duty to tell the police what to do. And he won't comment on decrim, even though the top health officials are saying it's the only way to stop the overdose crisis. They refer it to Farnworth, and Farnworth, who's the public safety minister, says, no, we can't do anything. And I saw David Eby at a thing the other day. I said, and it happens to be at all these events, right, where I'm kind of worked up and thinking about dead people and this, and hey, Dana, how you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm good to see you, David. We small talk for 20 seconds. Then I'm like, why aren't you doing anything about this stuff? It's a genocide, And he's like, well, this and that. And I'm like, that's not good enough. And I make him feel really uncomfortable. Yeah. And he doesn't want to talk to me anymore because I'm just making him feel uncomfortable and saying shit he doesn't really want to hear. And
was that Eby?
I get it. Yeah, Eby. So I'm not against David Eby, but in his position and the role he's doing, he's not stopping this crisis, right?
Right.
And so I said to him, we might have to we're thinking about doing office occupations. You might come and occupy your office. And but tell me what can I do to get you to do this? Because I know you support this. He goes, yeah, I support. I said, well, why? How? And I get
nothing.
You can't nothing. I'm like, what can we do? What should we do?
Because he knows it's not going to happen. They're not going to do it.
But I don't why not? What is it? Who are is it the American government? Is it the federal government? Is it the police lobby? Is it they don't think there's enough votes in it that they're going to lose the next election if they introduce it? Is that what it is? But sometimes these things seem to have majority support. I mean, I know that legalizing all drugs isn't necessarily, but with cannabis, it seemed like the government was lagging behind public opinion quite a bit, and we got majority support for it. But it wasn't necessarily the top issue, right? So you could still, but I mean, maybe it is
votes, a police thing. But are the
maybe
police
it's all those
leveraging
things,
this?
or maybe it's just, maybe it's something else. I don't really. It
seems easier if I'm just using the I don't know. It seems like it's easier to assume that it's the vote thing than a big conspiracy with the cops or something, or the police lobby's that strong, or I don't know. The cops seem powerful, but are they that powerful?
And actually, some of the cops, the head of the Victoria Police Association said, I support decrim. The chief police for Victoria said, I support decrim.
Right.
I know the Vancouver cops aren't going to speak against decrim.
Yeah.
So, you got the two biggest cities in the province, police chiefs both also supporting this. They could do a press conference with two cops there saying, we support this. We're gonna, the way to crack down on gangs is to legalize it and stuff, all that stuff, right? They could sell it the same way they've sold cannabis stuff. It would,
protect your kids, support legalization of all these drugs.
Maybe there's another lobby we don't know about.
I don't understand, but anyway. So I'm working.
Somebody's making a lot of money off dealing heroin.
But I'm working with some. Well, that's this money laundering thing also, which is, I'm not for money laundering, but it's kind of weird. They're saying it's like billions of dollars, and I think, well, we know the BC cannabis industry is worth billions of dollars, and although that money I think mostly isn't laundered in expensive cars, because a lot of it's just mom and pops who launder it just by paying their rent, and paying their bills and stuff, right? That's still laundering money, right?
Yeah.
If it's weed money and it wasn't legal, it doesn't even matter.
It washes it
automatically. Anything you do with it is laundering. Spending money you got illegally is laundering, right? But
exactly.
I wonder about
paying hydro bills.
Got anything for
in the last few years, we've seen several major banks getting huge multi-billion-dollar fines for laundering money. And some of them, the one bank in Europe whose name escapes me right now, they've been caught 3 times in the last 15 years. Each time they get multi-billion-dollar fines. Clearly, the fines are the cost of doing business. When you're laundering and dealing with this much money.
Right, they don't care.
And ultimately, I don't really think they're going to stop it from happening any more than they're going to stop drugs getting into the country. They might make it a little bit harder or this and that, but I bet any commission is going to say, oh, we need more cops and more crackdown.
More cash.
And not say, you want to stop money laundering? 90% of it's drug money. There's a march tomorrow morning in Surrey against gang violence and overdoses. And it's to like more cops and more crackdown. And I wish I could get out there at 9 a.m. to be like this, the solution to gang violence and overdoses and money laundering. Not going to solve all of it, but to solve 95% of it, legalize, regulate drugs, to get it out of the black market.
We should go and crash their thing with the megaphones.
I don't think it's going to be a very big event from what I can see, but it's all.
We can march with them and shout the right things through our megaphone.
I agree with their statement. I want to end gang violence. I want to stop overdoses.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them, and these people aren't. I was watching the guy being interviewed. He's not like our enemy. He's someone who cares about his community.
Frenemy.
He doesn't know any better, right? He wants to stop gang violence. He wants to stop overdoses. Well, we need 300 more police officers in Surrey, he's saying, right? And
that'll fix it.
This guy doesn't, but he, but he doesn't.
Yeah, I know.
He's just some guy who's trying to, he's worried about his community. He's trying to make things better, but ultimately, he's only going to make things way worse, right?
Yeah, let's make the same mistake again.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. If it's not working, I don't know why they throw more money at the problem. Well, it's going to fix it. It just doesn't work that way.
The federal health minister was announcing more crackdown on precursors for opiates and also precursors for amphetamines and ecstasy. So they're going to making it harder to make ecstasy or bring in ecstasy. It doesn't really make it harder. It just makes it more dangerous, of course, and more likely to be.
It just makes it more dangerous.
Do they not understand the solution to the problems of prohibition?
This is what's in their legislation.
More prohibition. They just did the minister of health federally just announced this on Twitter. I saw her thing saying we're introducing new. I don't know if they've introduced it or passed it or what level it was at, but they're putting in new laws that would make just listing a bunch of new chemicals and precursors that you can make other stuff out of, and then banning all that stuff. Thinking, oh well, if we just ban a few more chemicals, then we'll solve this whole. Everything will be fine.
Gasoline.
Right? We just didn't ban quite enough stuff.
Just makes a shittier product for people.
That's where fentanyl comes from.
Yeah.
That's why we have fentanyl, is because they banned all the other stuff, and fentanyl's the cheapest and easiest thing to get in, right?
So the next thing they're going to make is going to be more toxic and more dangerous.
It's just making it worse.
They can just make meth out of common household products. They just get a bunch of shit and fucking mix
it used
it
to
up
be
and-
cocaine. Cocaine is a much better stimulant than meth. And the reason meth became popular, it was around the same time that we stopped importing so much and started growing cannabis. Cannabis moved indoors into grow rooms because you can grow it indoors. But cocaine, you can't grow indoors and make enough cocaine out of it, but you can make meth indoors. And so it was during the 80s and 90s when in smuggling in by plane became a lot harder, meth became more popular. That's beautiful smoke ring there.
That is.
Meth became more popular,
crazy dope.
and cocaine became less popular, not because of demand, but because you could make meth at home, and meth is way worse. Bring back the cocaine and the coca tea.
Yeah.
Put the cocaine back in Coca-Cola.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's what we really need. Original recipe Coca-Cola.
I'd like to try
certify that Coca tea is very effective and will keep you up all night if you choose to use it in that way.
I have had the Coca tea.
I can attest to that.
It is. It's just like coffee or something.
It's like
coffee keeps you up all night too if you drink it.
It's a little
late
different
at
than
night as well.
coffee though, but yeah,
It's different, but
it is different.
Better. It's a cleaner stimulant, I find.
I find
it's less jittery. Yeah, less jittery when
Let's
you have
come
more.
down like coffee.
I still feel
go
pretty
up really
jittery on
hard,
it.
and then I come down hard. Where this one I was just like up, and then I was like, oh yeah, and then I was like, oh, I'm up pretty late. Should probably go to bed now.
Just not my drug. Not my drug. I don't know why. Whether it's the Coca tea or the candies or whatever else. Whether it's and cocaine
folks.
itself. I'm just
Not
not.
everybody wants
stomach.
a stimulating.
It's not one that. Yeah.
I'm
Everybody
stimulated
else.
enough most
You
of
don't
the
drink
time.
coffee either, right? I mean,
I don't now, but I did, and I love coffee. But
Me too.
it was different than. I think there's a big difference between the two. Like, I remember when everybody was partying and having fun and doing coke, I would do a little bit, and I was just like, oh god.
Yeah, but the
Yeah, it
coke you're
doesn't make
buying
you
at a
feel
party
good.
here, I mean, it's hard to say. We've had some samples come in actually of coke that are really good. We had a few samples come in that were really high potency.
Really good.
And what I was going to say, I mean, you should be
Is that a
surprised 'cause
subjective
you have
term there?
Well, be good that it's pure cocaine.
Pure cocaine.
That doesn't have crap in it, right?
Right.
Like, it's not caffeine and benzocaine or whatever, right? You know,
For numbing.
they put in a numbing agent, and they put in caffeine as a stimulating agent, and hey, you rub it on your
I love
gums,
it.
your gums get
Dextrose.
It gets the Dana Larson certification. Good shit.
One guy, he sent in 4 samples, pretty bigger chunks than he had to of cocaine. I'm guessing this person is a dealer
Right.
wanting to get their own
Bigger
stuff
chunks
so
than
they
he
know
had
what they're
to.
selling to people.
That's
and
right.
it turned out all of his stuff was pretty good.
And so it turns out.
That's
So
different.
so I take it the testing process is there's the machine certification and then there's the Dana Larson
If it's
certification.
good, you set it aside
Yeah.
to the Dana pile. At the end of the day, I come in, I mix them all up into a bowl.
Have a drink.
I'm gonna start hanging out with you more.
And I mean, it is, when
No,
you're
it's
throwing
all
away some of these
disposed
samples.
of.
If it's crappy, it's one thing, but if it's a really nice rock, you're like, oh, that's someone would really appreciate that.
Oh, my
but
Lord.
We're not supposed to keep anything.
It's all disposed.
I was gonna ask you about this off camera. but-
No samples we don't send. We're not sending stuff back to the mail. But you're only supposed to send us the tiniest little sample. So the one guy sent us bigger. That's why I figured he's a dealer because most people don't want to part with like a half-gram rock or whatever, right? They
Right.
want to give you a little bit. But I don't know. Anyways,
Yeah, he's like,
but I
one
mean,
for the
normally the
test and one
samples are
for
really
you.
tiny. You don't need to send in very much to make it work, right? I'm just joking about all that stuff. Really, you just need a tiny little sample. Wrap it up in tin foil, double, triple bag it in Ziplocs, put it in the mail, and you'll get your results back as soon as you receive it. Within like that day, you'll get your answer back.
Great you got that exists now. That's an
You should put a picture on the website, a couple of different examples of how much the sample is needed.
We are going to start doing more of that.
Just so
to
people
have some
know,
photos on
'cause
there,
it's-
and we post all the results on the website too. We're actually just posting them all today, our first batch. So there should be about a dozen results.
When I
up
seen it
there.
in operation, I was amazed on how small the amount was. You know
We had
what
one
I
guy
mean?
send us an amount that was like not
It
even
was, like,
enough.
so
Like
hard
it was
to
like
even,
1
like-
grain of salt or something, and we were like, oh, I don't know if it's not. Quite
Does it
enough.
register weed at all?
Well, the problem with weed is it's supposed to identify like a chemical, right? But cannabis is not a few chemicals; it's thousands of chemicals,
Right.
right? So, I think you could, if you had like isolate, THC or CBD isolate, it could define those things for you
Yeah.
because it's that. But it's very it would be so much noise with a bud. Maybe you could tell it was a bud, but you already know that. But it would be very difficult for it, and it's not really designed for like
dude,
pesticides
somebody's
or
cutting
things
my
like that,
cocaine
right?
with
And it
weed,
needs
man.
to be, it's not sensitive enough to really, because if something's under 5 or 4%, it's hard for it to pick it up. And so a pesticide sprayed on a leaf is not going to be 4% of the material, right? So to do that, you need a gas chromatography, and that machine. This thing costs about $40,000 for this machine. Like, we had to save up for this for a few months to be able to invest in this thing. The gas chromatography costs over $100,000. Plus, it costs $25 per test.
Yeah.
And the person operating it needs a lot more experience and knowledge. But that one
And a
can
higher
give you
salary.
even much more detailed information down to less than 1% materials, identify things a lot more accurately. And they use that kind of testing for when you send your buds into a lab, or when we send our stuff to a lab to get pesticide testing and THC levels and all that stuff.
Steep Hill Laboratories used to come to the events
they do
with
that kind of
machine.
thing. And I've thought about buying one of those, and maybe, but $100,000 is kind of out of my, like $40,000 was a big investment for us, right? And I know we got all that sweet 420 money coming in.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, so if we had, I'm not sure.
Put my kids through college.
And having it be $25 a test also makes it prohibitive. You've got to charge people or have a really, big bankroll to be able to run that kind of stuff. So that's why we got the FTIR, which is the same one that everyone else really uses for this kind of stuff.
Well, that's very cool.
Yeah, it's
for
great.
overdose prevention is the one you're looking for.
That and the fentanyl test strip, right? Those two things together, I think, help. But so with opiates, it's a little, I don't know. Yeah, it's good for opiates and heroin, but really it's better for party drugs is the right word, but like other street drugs, white powders.
Well, even pills that might be like the pharmaceutical drugs
send you
that
my
aren't.
ecstasy.
It'll do all pharmaceutical stuff too, right?
Like if you buy a pharmaceutical drug on the black market, now there's like fake ones out there they've been telling everyone about. So just you never know, right? So then at least you get
for
some
sure.
tested
Viagra,
to make
I think our thing will pick up like that kind of people.
Hilarious.
So there's a lot of fake Viagra out there and other fake
Xanax
synthetic.
and
Because all these
Percocets
websites,
and-
you buy them online.
I'd like
right?
to-
And
You can buy
cheap,
Viagra
and I don't know.
online.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about that, but I've read
I'd love to
stuff
be able to
on
go back in time and test all the old ecstasy I had, and like what was actually in that. Because I'd love to.
That's funny. I got one put away.
I'd love to be able to put that together
pull
again.
That out. It's really old, and it's probably it's like a pill.
You can't get it like that anymore.
It's not pure.
I think a lot of dealers will.
It was good.
You can test blood or acid.
It's like
also,
half
yeah.
meth or something. You're like,
yeah, whatever it was.
Sometimes
I think it was speed.
They have a reagent they can use also. There's chemical tests too, right? And we don't use a lot of them because the FTIR is more accurate, but we use the chemical fentanyl test strip. Yeah. We have a benzo strip as well that we can use if we need to for some things. For acid, I think you put it into a little bit of water and then you test the water or something, or you dilute it off of the blotter. But we can test for acid. There's limitations on how specific you can get as to what chemicals it is, but we can tell you if it's on the right family of chemicals. And there is another substance whose name I forget that is sometimes substituted for acid, and that can be more harmful. And we can tell you if that's stuff's
water,
or something, things like that. We can differentiate some of that stuff. There are limitations sometimes to how nuanced of a result you can get out of it, right? Or
it's the synthetic LSD they made. It's like garbage.
But it's definitely good for LSD and things like that. Absolutely.
There you go. And I just figured out that water rhymes with blotter. So what do you know about that?
Water blotter, everyone. Get it? What it?
Yes. Well, I'm suitably high now. It's 5:40. My parking runs out at 5:45. So if we don't shut the show down, somebody's gonna have to run out and do something for me because I don't want to get it. I can see it right there on the hill. I think is it still there? Yeah. No, we should probably shut the show down because I don't. Unless do we have more videos to play? Oh, we have Conroy. We got to watch that.
Well, I'm going to go. Thanks for having me.
Dana, it was awesome to have you. Thanks for doing a session with us here. That was good stuff. Stay out of the court. We'll see Melissa DeGenova there soon enough, I guess. Yeah.
The party pooper.
Yeah, she'll come down herself. Pooper. The parade pooper. Oh yeah, but wait, Dana, there was one thing before you go, Dana. She was essentially. I saw your tweet where she was kind of. You listened to her on CKNW.
She was bragging on how she
you said in your tweet she was bragging.
She was saying she was like, we've lost a lot of public events in Vancouver, right?
Yeah.
And I bring this up sometimes as this is a problem. They're all being shut down by soaring police costs. St. Patrick's Day, Canada Day Parade, the Pride Davie Street Parade.
Yeah.
We've almost lost the Christmas Santa Claus Parade until TELUS stepped in. We've car-free days complaining about their policing bill. And their policing bills are all way less than ours are too, right? So... And we just had Italian Day, and she's like, "Oh, we got to give this civic status and give them more money to do stuff." And so they picked she's Italian, DeGenova, right? So
yes.
If she was Irish, she probably would have subsidized St. Patrick's Day and not cared about Italian Day. And to me, it shouldn't be like them picking winners and losers, right? If people want to show up for an event, that should be who decides is who shows up, right?
Right.
So, but she was sort of she was saying, I forget the exact wording, but she was sort of pointing out all these events. and saying, well, 420 just shut down too. And to me, it's like, shouldn't we be not losing all these public events? We should have more public things. And the cost.
Are they a nuisance for the city?
She actually said that because of 420, they couldn't fund a breakfast program for children that cost $100,000. That it was hard for them to find the money for this $100,000 breakfast thing and she's trying to tie our $100,000 policing bill. And of course, the police get their budget for the year. If there's something costs more, they don't come back. Oh, they did 420. We need another $100,000 from the city. It doesn't work like that, right? So, but she was saying that we're responsible for this not.
She's just
the kids not getting breakfast or whatever,
pulling that
right?
out straight out of her ass.
And of course, they throw money at said $250,000 for the bike rave with 10,000 people, $5 million, so 5,000 people can watch women's soccer downtown in an all ages beer garden. Right?
What?
This was a few years ago.
$5 million?
This is 5 years during the FIFA World Cup when that was here. The city of Vancouver spent $5 million for a watching station downtown where you could have screens of that, all ages, beer garden with face painting for kids. It only held 5,000 people maximum. It was for a week, so if it was full every day, I did all the numbers, it was still way smaller than any of these protests. And they spent $5 million on it. And so they throw money at these things all the time, huge amounts of money. And it's not just 420. I mean, Pride and St. Patrick's Day Parade, all these things. The amount they gave for that that one bike rave event that only draws 10,000 people would have covered 420 and Pride and St. Patrick's Day and the Canada Day Parade for more than a year. But they decided, well, we like bicycling, so we're going to, I'm Italian, so let's give money to Italian Day.
Yeah.
Oh, we like the LGBT community, let's give them money. And I'm not against these events getting subsidies, but it shouldn't be based on who you like at City Hall or if they like your political message or not. Right? It should just be based on people showing up. And really,
or if your family's there.
So Melissa Genova has an idea to cover policing bills. She wants corporations to put money into a fund that would then be used for public events and then go to the police. And that's not going to happen. No, corporations already sponsor events, and then they get advertising at that event for the sponsorship, right? I mean, that's normally, and events get their own, so it's not a very good idea.
No.
And she's talking about $5 or $10 grand per event. And as we know, I mean, $5 grand it makes nothing to the police budget. If they gave us $5 grand off the police bill, and for other events too, it wouldn't make a big difference either. So it's not really the proper solution to this issue, right? But
no, it's not. Well, I just saw that. I saw the tweet, and people should go and read Dana's tweets because you have a great thing going on there. You got
it's
a lot
not
of
even
stuff.
just in Vancouver, actually, all across the country. Like events are getting shut down by policing, right? And we've either got to decide
on this.
We don't need so many police at these events, or if we're going to keep everybody really safe and the police are needed, then that's got to be covered in a different way. And to me, if you're on the beach or in a public space by yourself or with 5,000 people, that policing should be a civic service that you get to enjoy regardless of what kind of crowd size you are. So I think, and that's why if you're using sanitation services and you're generating revenue at your event, you should cover that kind of stuff. But the policing, I feel, is kind of separate, especially when it's so arbitrary. You get no say in how it works. Your bill can double or triple one year, and you don't know why because they sent different cops there that year. Or there should be some way of at least knowing what's going to happen and making a decision. Some of the cops who send to 420 are there to try to keep us safe. Some of the cops are there. I mean, these send cops are to harass us all the time. And some of the cops are there to check out gang members and stuff, and some of them are there to blockade the art gallery, and we don't get any say in any of that. So, anyways, I got to run, and you probably do too. But
yes, it's true. Thanks, Dana. That's good.
Ultimately,
go on to Twitter, go get a Twitter account, and go and talk to these politicians because you can tweet right at them. Be polite or be not crazy.
Firm.
But I think it helps the more we actually hit them on these things every time they make it.
Yeah, I mean, Twitter's kind of an elitist platform. I mean, it's open to everybody, but also people that use Twitter tend to be, media, journalists, people.
Yeah. But that means you can have direct access to them, which is nice.
I like Twitter because you can directly interact with people and kind of come after them.
Yeah.
I just discovered I was blocked by the Canadian Centre on Substance Abuse. I realized, in February I was putting them down for saying that marijuana can lead to opiate use. And then I go to their thing and just check something, and they blocked me. Oh, that's funny.
They said marijuana can lead to opiate.
There was something, it's a whole other story or whatever.
Well, we'll have you back next week to talk about that or something, or sometime soon.
For sure. Absolutely. Okay, gotta go.
Yes.
Good stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, Dana. And thanks, Opus, for coming down to the show today.
Oh, no problem.
Opus is working on some projects, too, coming up here.
Actually, I'll be coming back to Pot TV with the show, so.
Oh, shit.
Stay tuned.
It's going to be fun. It's been a long time coming. Opus has been on hiatus for a while, but...
Well, I doing stuff.
Yeah.
Doing the stuff.
But, I got some ideas. I think it's going to be fun.
Opus, who is, of course, was the co-host of the 420 Lifestyle Show with Carly Marley before.
That's right.
That's Carly House. You founded the show.
I'm the show founder.
Show founder, yeah. And then Carly was your co-host.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I passed the torch. I passed the dab torch to Carly.
The big shot.
And I will say here now, Carly's here in the room, but I told her before. I'm proud. She's done an excellent job.
Hell yeah,
Glad
she
to
has.
See where that's gone. That's
big time.
Yep, great show.
It's all good. Yeah, I guess.
Which you can watch on Monday, every Monday at 4 p.m. Oh yeah, Opus goes legit. Opus is too legit to quit.
Too legit.
And it can open with that music every time with the hammer.
Oh yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and with Opus breakdancing. Yeah. Beautiful. All right, everybody out there in Pod TV land, I guess we'll see you back here next week or sometime. If we don't pop in here, we went to the beach last week.
Well, it was nice
We
there.
should probably try to do more outings because they're a lot of fun and it's beautiful. The summertime here in Vancouver. If it's nice out, we got to take you on our little missions with us somewhere. Yeah, because there's a lot of nature. There's a lot of cool places to smoke weed in Vancouver.
Yeah.
So many good places.
Yeah.
Vancouver's an outdoor town, right?
Dab Ventures. We need more Dab Ventures, Carly Marley. Yeah. So we'll see you next Friday. You can watch all the fun on Pod TV all week long. Tune in to pod.tv to see all the cool stuff Anil's doing. We have the John Conroy video that we're going to play at the end of the show here, though. We want to make sure we don't forget about that.
JC.
But that's right, JC. What would JC do?
He's my JC.
What would JC do?
Savior.
All right, guys. Here he is.
I've been involved in this area going back to 1972. And when the number of people busted for cannabis went from a few hundred to 10,000. And then by 78, it was 50,000. I incorporated the BC Compassion Club Society in 97, which was over 20 years ago. And when all of this started, we had personal producers, which we still have now under Part 14 of the Cannabis Act, and designated growers. And we were involved in quite a bit of litigation, trying to get Health Canada, under a different government regime at the time, to allow designated growers to grow for more than one, to allow people to have more than 4 licenses in one place, or 3 licenses, I think it was originally, or 2. Anyway, the courts always agreed that these limitations were unreasonable. They were bearing in mind that for medical patients, you're under an obligation to provide reasonable access to their medicine to avoid the violation of their constitutional rights. That doesn't exist in the rec market. But we don't have you doing anything for the medical market and the medical patients in relation to their reasonable access, other than by growing for themselves, have somebody grow for them, or getting it in the mail from an existing LP, which is what the court found to be not working properly in the Allard case. So my concern is, given the history, and I've had to read all the royal commissions, read all the investigations from, everybody over the last many, many years, and listen to experts in court confirm there's no lethal dose, and haven't seen, other than a few young people eating too many cookies at a 420, or the odd person who maybe has schizophrenia in their family who has a psychotic episode, where are the health and safety problems that you are so concerned about? I know that they exist for alcohol, tobacco, many other things, but why can't we simply have designated growers who have their product tested? Why do we need all this other stuff? Why can't we just continue with the designated grower? Surely the bottom line is, it's a safe product, nothing more. I have a few more, but I'll sit down.
Yes, we're going to try to do one at a time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that was not so much a question as a rhetorical question, but I guess all I would say along those lines is the Cannabis Act, the cannabis regs are 6 months old. They represent a sea change in the approach to cannabis relative to Canada, relative to most jurisdictions around the world. It does take a certain view of the product, and we have tried to provide through the micro license, through other provisions that we put into the Cannabis Act and regs, a path for people who participated in the gray market, the black market, to come in under this regulated scheme. I mean, a view that it's still too heavily regulated, I understand probably most people in this room would take that perspective, but why we're here and why we've created this class of license and this kind of path is to try and provide a way to meet in the middle with something that is proportionate and goes ahead. And I guess that's all I can say. The only other thing I would say is we have done things over the years to try and ratchet down slowly the level of regulation we do within the commercial space. So the easiest example is the vault, right? You can still buy used vaults on eBay right now because we used to require them, and at a certain point we said, you know what, that isn't proportionate to the risk. Business people want to protect their inventory as much as anybody else does. They'll take reasonable measures to protect their inventory. So we kind of have a few specific requirements around storage of finished product, but it's not what it once was. We've done things like within our licensing process, Joanne talked about how we used to inspect. Before you could have a plant in the ground, you would have been inspected once. Before you could sell intra-industry, you would have been inspected probably twice. We've moved away from that. We've moved to a model where once you're licensed, you can start business, you can sell within the industry, and the only time we're going to insist on an inspection is when you're going to sell directly to patients or directly to the province without having to go through someone who's already got a full processing license. So I know that won't fully address the medical access point that you raised. All that to say, though, that we do continue to look and reassess our framework on a regular basis, either within the rules and how we administer them, and then obviously the Cannabis Act is set up for a 3-year review 2.5 years from now, because that's built into the legislation, and we can relook at where we're at that point.
Not before.
I could hardly see with, we've already got a huge set of regulations coming to enable the new classes of products in the fall. There'll be a new government, so I think 2.5 years from now will come at us really, really quickly.
Yeah, but I have to add, those new regulations have such low THC limits in terms of edibles and extracts that you've got all of these medical patients who've been entitled to possess and use that in different forms since Smith, and many of them are disabled and unable to make those products for themselves. And so, we need to have you address having stronger products for medical patients instead of these very low ones that are just going to promote continuation of the underground.
The only thing I'll say to that is the proposed regulations that yes, the 10 milligram limit is there for edible products, but for concentrates, it's a much higher limit in a package. So that's what's been proposed.
I'd just like to pay my respects to John Conroy and for what he's done for this industry, so thank you very much for your questions.
Or than a micro grower. But surely a person who's a designated grower, if they can't apply to grow for more than 2, could apply to become a micro producer with a license to sell and the sub-license to sell for medical purposes, and in that way expand the number of patients that they're growing for. I mean, they may have to then stop the DG because it's merged into the micro.
Absolutely, yeah. So and that's exactly what's kind of contemplated. Is that you could scale up and then sell for dozens or hundreds of patients under a micro. It would be a vertically integrated micro cultivator processor with medical sales. The only hook I would say is the federal medical sales is still only by some kind of courier, mail, whatever. It's not retail. So
was there not something to do with online? Yeah, so online is another.
Yeah, but it can be something simpler too. It can be by phone, a telephone order that gets delivered. There's no retail. So I just want to emphasize that here.
Although a person could have a bank of computers in their retail store, and you could order online and go across and pick it up from the wicket, couldn't you? John. One question. Before clarifying that one, did you know that in BC, the Agricultural Land Commission, since last August, requires you to grow in soil? And you can't grow unless you had a building that was there before August, I think it was of last year. Does that affect your GPP thing? I know you can grow outside now. So does it matter if you're growing inside a building in soil as far as these building requirements?
I'm going to pass over because we've been looking at outdoor grow licenses, which kind of goes to your question, and there's been, at least some of them I think have been kind of hoop greenhouses, temporary greenhouses, but I'll pass it over.
Yeah, so I can touch on it a little bit, and Jackie can kind of jump on it as well. So generally, we consider indoor grow is kind of you're within a building, so it's typically a permanent structure with walls, something that is in place. With an outdoor grow application, you're either sort of truly growing outside. We have seen some applications where you're growing from kind of a temporary structure, which is kind of like I think they call it a hoop house, but you are growing in the ground. And those are subject to the requirements for outdoor grow.
That's
yeah,
indoor?
sir? No, that's outdoor.
Temporary structure.
Mm-hmm.
These are the care packs that we give out. Somewhere between 160 to 200 of these packs every time that we're here, twice a week.
And what's in the packs?
Gummy, candy there, a cap, a joint. We have these other caramel. Unfortunately, because of the city's clampdown on dispensaries and the transition to the non-medical legal government stores, there's people really struggling to find what they need out there. 180 people are going to line up here today in the rain for hours to get, you know, a bag like that. There's a great need in this city that's not being met.
How many? 230 people. That is the biggest lineup we had so far this year.
Shame on our municipal government for not allowing the free access to medical dispensaries and edibles, which should be happening.
So say thank you, man. Really appreciate you.
Thank you very much for saying this.